Perfect. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Doctor. Tonight, we are going to learn how to get 100 great years. I think I want to push for a little bit higher number than that. That sounds like a really good number. Okay, so tonight we are very blessed to have an incredible man with us. He has taught, lectured, and trained doctors well over 10,000 hours all over the world. It is Mr. Bob Rakowski. Dr. Bob, are you ready to teach us tonight?
I am absolutely ready, and I appreciate you always. Thank you. Thank you so much. And by the way, if you have questions as they come up, please type them in the chat because we will have a question and answer afterwards. And this is actually going to be a multi-part series. So we're going to talk about how to get 100 great years. We're going to talk about the importance of lifestyle. We'll talk about how to eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right, and some massive things that have happened that make it easier than ever to get at least, Carol, as you said, 100 great years. I was on a podcast earlier today and people asked me, what is the limit of human longevity? Well, for most of our existence, it was determined to be about 120 years, but who knows, with stem cells and things like that, we may be able to get more. Little background on me. I always like to tell people first and foremost, I'm a family man. I've got 3 beautiful children, 2 and a third granddaughters. So the 1/3 is 1/3 cooking, due in October. And I've also been in clinical practice now. This is my 30th year. I've treated world champion athletes from every major professional sport. And I've also seen people that have been given a death sentence. This foot was given a death sentence. Notice they were going to cut it off 2 days from that picture. And that's what the foot looked like 17 months later. Very, very functional. And certainly her entire health got better. I've also taught doctors all over the world. So any question you have, please feel free to ask it. One of the questions that I always had is, what is the purpose of life? And, I like what Stephen Covey said. There's 4 purposes and they all begin with an L. You want to live? Certainly, if you're going to be here, why not live? You want to love? Love is certainly what makes us all of our best self. You want to learn? That's a great thing to do because that's how we expand. And keep in mind, there's always so much more than we don't know than what we do know about any topic. So why not learn all that you can about what is most interesting to you? And then ultimately leave a legacy. That's really where it stands. Can you make the world a lot better than it was when you arrived? And I believe we all have that opportunity. So this is a graph of health span versus lifespan. And they actually call it the wellness life curve. So I want you to notice, if someone takes pretty good care of themselves, they get to be around 70 years old and they may be functioning somewhere like about a typical 30-year-old in our society. Now, you might think that's rare, but I have a bunch of 70-year-olds in my practice that are profoundly fit, active, great body composition, great mind, still enjoying life to the fullest. And then there's the other spectrum where people, heck, I asked someone, when was the last time you felt good? And they said, I don't know, maybe junior high school. And then by the time they're on the decline, they get to be 40 years old and they feel absolutely terrible. Now, keep in mind what happens with the last few years of life is you just, slow down a little bit and then you die. Whereas these people have been on a gradual decline for 70 years and they're majorly medicated for the last 20 years of their life. And that's far more common than it should be. This was a graph of the health span versus the lifespan in different countries of the world. And in nearly every country, everybody has at least a decade of major disability. And think about that for just a moment. So what's going on? Why are we not living better longer? So Dan Buettner was part of a study with the National Geographic. They wrote a book about it. It's called The Blue Zones. And they studied areas of the world where people lived consistently to be over 100 years old. And here's what they determined. How long and how well we live is 90% the choices we make and only 10% of our genetics. Dean Ornish did a very interesting study. They actually did gene mapping And they did some very basic things. They cleaned up people's diet a little bit, gave them a little bit moderate exercise, and had them do a little bit of meditation, about 15 minutes a day. And literally 90 days later, there were over 500 genes associated with longevity that were turned up a notch. And there were an equal number of genes that were related to early death that were turned down. So you can become consistently younger in just 90 days. So I love this book by Gary Keller. He repeatedly asks throughout the book, what is the one thing that you can do that in doing so would make everything else either easier or unnecessary? And ultimately, Ornish had that answer. He said, sustainable changes must be pleasurable. If you give someone a task that they don't like doing, or an activity or a food that they don't like, they're not going to do it. So we want to make things pleasurable. And so when it comes to exercise, classes, high energy, good music, fun, if that's your cup of tea. But whatever way you like to move, you will do it a lot more consistently if it's fun for you. Then we start talking about things that people do every day, like coffee or tea or beverages. And we have superfood infused beverages that are profoundly pleasurable. And every single time the person takes a sip, their body moves in a better direction. I've used this study many, many times. Paul Clayton is a health researcher. And when he published this article in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, he was attacked from about every angle. And what he said was that when they looked at the mid-Victorian period of England, if someone got to be age 5, they would basically live to be 80 years old. And by the way, our lifespan today is 79.6 years. Now, what did those 80 years look like? Well, at 79.9, this person was usually still working 12 hours a day. They get up early, they work all day, they'd have a nice dinner with their family, they'd go to bed. And as Paul Clayton said, I listened to him in person. He says, you know what? Then their final month, they'd sleep in a little more and a little more and a little more each day. And then finally, they slept in forever. And so they were very, very functional right up to the very end. Whereas you look at now, every major country has at least a final decade average of medical disability. He also then looked at the causes of death in Victorian England. Only 2% of people died of cancer and 6% died of cardiovascular disease. They did tons of autopsies back then. Now, cancer and heart disease are 68%. So what conclusion can we draw? We've created a world that creates cancer. We've created a world that creates heart disease. But guess what? We can use the wisdom of the past and not develop either of those circumstances. Keep in mind also that people were dying from infectious disease. And that's why he said up to the age 5. There was plenty of babies that died during childbirth. There was mothers that got infected. There was an interesting researcher, doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis, and he made an interesting observation. He was working in a hospital, and doctors would literally go and do an autopsy. They didn't wear gloves back then. They just cut this body up. And then without even washing their hands, they would go over and they would deliver a baby. Well, fascinating enough, one of his favorite instructors was doing an autopsy on a mom that had died. She got basically whatever they called child delivery fever back then, probably got infected during the delivery. And he cut his hand with a scalpel accidentally while he was doing that autopsy. 2 weeks later, he was dead and died in much the same way that this mother did. So he had the idea that maybe dead bodies could transfer something to humans. He called them cadaveric particles. And he said, here's what I suggest. We should wash our hands in between doing an autopsy and delivering a baby. By the way, you can easily verify this looking up Ignaz Semmelweis. Well, he was so heavily criticized for that, he was actually committed to an insane asylum where he died for proposing such a preposterous idea. But here we look at the US, and in 1900, the death rate from infectious disease was 800 per 1,000, or 80%. Then we had a real flu pandemic. That was in 1918. That was the Spanish flu. And there was a lot of death rate from infectious disease then. But notice that besides that hiccup, there was a very steady decline, and it continued all the way through there. Now, penicillin and antibiotics were added here. If that were a big difference, this decline would have dropped steadily. Notice that once they started giving vaccines, there's basically no drop in the death rate from infectious disease. How many vaccines did someone get in 1955? I don't know, one, maybe two. How many do kids get by age 6 in this country now? 76. That's for the US. I don't know what they do in Canada. And keep in mind that we're not getting any gain from it at all, but we're seeing a lot of loss in health from children. So here's what really kills us. I call it the deadly quartet: stress, toxins, malnutrition, and physical inactivity. And since Covey put together his purpose of life to live, to love, to learn, and to leave a legacy, I had created a life pyramid, and the base of the pyramid is love, and I'll show a quote in the next slide from Og Mandino. But basically, most of all, one of the comments is, and most of all, I will love myself, for when I do, I will zealously inspect all things that I allow to enter my mind, my heart, my soul, and my body. And that's very, very important. If you do love yourself enough to do that, then you'll make really good choices. Purpose, we want to have a purpose. There has to be some driving purpose to keep us growing. And by the way, growth is fun. Expansion is fun. Helping people is fun. And it's going to take a little bit of discipline. There's a lot of things that can pull us off of track. Then I call them the Magnificent Seven. You've got to eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right every day. And then guess what? We're all unique, and everybody has something unique that they probably need a little more of in order to be their best self. It might be a certain nutrient, it might be sleep, it might be entertainment, who knows? But everybody has a unique need. And then everybody also has a unique need for something that they might need to avoid. A lot more food sensitivities these days. I personally need to avoid bad news. It doesn't sit well with me. Started getting away from news 25 years ago. Nothing ever happened in the world that I needed news for. There's a quote from Og Mandino in the Greatest Salesman in the World. This is the scroll, the first scroll. And he says, I will greet this day with love in my heart. Love is the greatest secret of success in all ventures. Muscle can split a shield and even destroy life, but only the unseen power of love can open the hearts of men. And until I master that art, I will remain no more than a peddler in the marketplace. And he goes on to say that he will love the sun and the stars and the moon and the earth and everybody on it. But the biggest line, I believe, is, and most of all, I will love myself, for when I do, I will zealously inspect all things that I allow to enter my body, my mind, my soul, and my heart. And I think that is probably the greatest line that I have ever read. And that is the secret to health, happiness, and success. When we start looking at purpose, purpose ultimately is going to create our identity. If my purpose is to add value to the world, then I might want to identify with being someone who's good-natured, someone that shares good things, someone that grows and leads by example. It'll lead to attitudes, beliefs, values, skills, and knowledge, and then ultimately our behavior. But notice the behavior is the tip of the iceberg. So if someone doesn't have a clearly defined purpose, who knows? Maybe they're just kind of floating around not knowing where to go. In fact, it's been said, if we don't have something to aim at, if we don't have a goal, we're aimless. So it's good to get that purpose. Then we get to discipline. Jim Rohn said it best: we all must suffer one of two things, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret and disappointment. He says the pain of discipline, it takes a little bit of effort every day, but the results are more than worth it. Pain of regret, that lasts a lifetime. From the Tools of Titans, this was Jocko Willink. Everybody was asked, they took 50 sages of wisdom. He was the ground force commander of US troops in Fallujah, Iraq. I've read several books by Jocko Willink, and he's one beast of a human, but he is profoundly disciplined. He gets up at 3 o'clock every day. He trains hard every day. He was a jujitsu grappler, and he'd start his day by tapping out 20 Navy SEALs. And you know what? That type of discipline served him really, really well. And I promise you, saved a lot of lives and a lot of freedom. And then we have Angela Duttwerk. She wrote a book called Grit. And here's what they said about Angela's work. She said, psychologists have spent decades searching for the secret of success, but Angela Duckworth is actually the one that found it. So she studied very, very successful people. They looked at people entering the Naval Academy and who would actually get through and win, because it was a very tough program. And they found that it was the gritty people that won. And here's what she said. She had an interesting equation. She said, talent times effort equals skill, and skill times effort equals achievement. So when we look at that, talent times effort squared is what makes the difference there. And when we look, right, if you double your effort, well, by her equation, which by the way, this was like some major prize winning thing, almost the level of Nobel Prize. Double your effort, you get 4 times the result. Triple it, 9 times the result. Quadruple it, 16 times the result. What if you actually work 10x as hard? 100x the result. And so, you know what? If you love it enough to really put your all into it, that's really what it takes to be the best of the best. Then I want to talk about paradigms for a moment, because Stephen Covey wrote the most successful book of the entire last century. And he said, you know what, if you want small improvements, change your behavior. But if you want massive changes, change your paradigm, change the way you look at things and the way you see things. Dr. Jeff Bland was Linus Pauling's research director for a number of years. He and I taught a tag team seminar for more than a decade. And he is the founder of functional medicine. And they said there are 3 major discoveries that are paradigm shifts that make a massive difference as it relates to health. Number 1 is emergence. Number 2 is epigenetics. And number 3 is nutrigenomics. So I like this story of emergence. If you heard my lecture on nutrition and cancer, a PhD researcher named Dean Black walked into a room of 200 doctors and he asked, you know, how does a hurricane start? And the answer he wanted was when conditions are just right. How does the tornado start? When conditions are just right. How does a tsunami start? When conditions are just right. And how about all of these conditions, whether we're talking cancer, diabetes, autoimmunity, hypothyroid, neurodegeneration, cardiovascular, whatever, the conditions have to be right for that to happen. And how does it resolve? We change the conditions to those of better health. And I really like this guy, David Agus. He says cancer and heart disease should be thought of as verbs. The question is not, do you have cancer? The question is, are you cancering? I don't know if he called it heart diseasing, you know, but he basically said it that way. And here's what he said: keep the healthy soil and the bad seeds won't grow. He's a big fan of the bioterrain, as am I. With genetic research, they thought one gene would make only one protein, but it can actually make over 30,000 variations. So this is Gwyneth Paltrow as she is. This is Gwyneth Paltrow in a fat suit in the movie Shallow Hal. But I promise you, all the proteins of her body are very, very different. And they're not different because of her genetics. They are different because of her choices. And we all have within us our best self and our not so good self. And finally, nutrigenomics. Basically, we know that nutrients talk to our genes. They can turn up genes, they can turn down genes, they can even turn genes on or turn genes off. And with nutrigenomics, here's what I tell people: good food, good genetic expression, and expand it to lifestyle choices as well. Bad food, bad genetic expression. Malnutrition is the #1 cause of death on the planet. I'm a massive fan of superfoods. Ganoderma lucidum has been around for over 4,000 years. It's the top superfood on the planet. What does that mean? It's got all the nutrition, all the fabulous 50, all the vitamins, minerals, amino acids, proteins, carbohydrates, fat, fiber, and water, and at doses that make a difference. And in different websites, it is the top consensus superfood. By the way, it also goes by the name reishi and ling qi. So 1,900 medical studies and climbing every single day. Plenty of studies showing how good it is literally for every cell of our entire body with no downside. And there's me lecturing at a major conference. And here's what I can tell you after 30 years of creating nutrition programs. Dean Ornish was right. Sustainable changes must be pleasurable. And the number one reason that people use when they make a food choice or a drink choice, it's got to taste good, then it's got to be affordable, it's got to be convenient. And why not have it be really turbocharged and healthy? And guess what? We cover all of those things with healthy shakes, healthy coffee, healthy tea. And this is Frank. He lost 100 pounds in 10 months drinking a shake that tasted like liquid birthday cake. And by the way, we have a group called the 7-Day Challenge where you can try a shake a day and some vegetables and some capsules and coffee and tea and see what you do. And across the world, we're seeing phenomenal changes. And that's going to be the end of part one. We have a lot more to go with 100 great years. We'll take it over next week, but that leads to our questions and answers. And I think I'll bring everybody back.
Perfect. So we do have some questions already ready to go. Claudio has a business partner with a grandson under the age of 3 years that was just diagnosed with LLL leukemia this past weekend. Could you please touch on the diagnosis and what it is you would recommend, please?
Well, there's a lot of different leukemias, but here's the great news. When you start looking at cancers that are good to get, medicine has one of the best track records with leukemia. So in my very long lecture on nutrition and cancer, a world-renowned oncologist said this: if medicine has a good track record with something, we want to take advantage of medicine. But keep in mind, the healthier you go into a circumstance, the healthier you stay in a circumstance, the greater the probability of success on the backside. So I had a guy that came in and he was being treated for a chronic sinus infection. And back then I could look at blood under the microscope and I saw a lot of very abnormal white cells. I sent him to the emergency room, called the ER. I said, look, I've got a guy, I'm 99.9% sure he has a really acute aggressive leukemia. Can you do a good workup? Well, they, life flighted him to the major cancer hospital. He was put in isolation for a month. They only gave him a 10% chance of survival. But the great news is, with that aggressive as that one was, he had been my patient for at least a decade at that point in time. And now, he's 15, 16 years post-treatment and doing beyond fabulous. So there's lots of things that can be done for this young child. Here's what I tell people in a way that sometimes rubs people the wrong way. I tell people, look, there's not a cancer we can't kill. If I were to take you and run your body through a 10,000 degree blast furnace for 10 minutes, we'd kill every cancer cell in your body. Problem is you wouldn't like the side effects. So why wouldn't we find a way to protect bodies? And so Ganoderma lucidum, the studies on that and cancer, one, it unwinds the perfect storm of cancer. The perfect conditions of cancer are low oxygen, low nutrients, high acid, chronic inflammation, and immune suppression. And Ganoderma is a positive modulator of all those, but it also enhances the killing effect of chemotherapy while protecting the normal cells. And that's usually the protocol with leukemia, just chemotherapy. But if radiation were involved with a different type of cancer, Ganoderma enhances the killing effect of radiation and protects the normal cells. So we'd want to do that.
Perfect. Okay, so Don has a customer whose doctor put him on a FODMAP diet. Some mushrooms are on the excluded list. My customer's asking if Ganoderma is on the excluded list. I told her that PubMed recognizes no negative interactions. But what is your opinion?
Oh, well, we have plenty of people on that diet that do well on it, and Ganoderma is a great supplement. So you can't compare food-based mushrooms to medicinal-based mushrooms, and this is the known immune modulator. This is phenomenal for modulating allergy, modulating inflammatory process, for sealing and healing the gut, for enhancing digestion, for being a good prebiotic to enhance the probiotics within the gut. So across the board, it's a great thing. And we have patients, plenty of patients in that circumstance that every one of them does well with it.
Okay. Karen asks, she drinks sparkling water almost exclusively. Is there any danger for the liver or internal organs if we drink sparkling water every day?
So here's what we know, right? They sparkle it with CO2, carbon dioxide. And so it's going to be a little more acid, but not much, than baseline neutral water. So could that potentially be a problem? So here's what I tell people, and this is what the pharmacology journals say. They estimate that we are all made of about 50 trillion cells, 50 trillion cells. And each of those cells is exposed every single day to about 1 trillion molecules of oxygen. And then when oxygen goes into the cell, carbon dioxide comes out. So they have a different unit of measurement for the amount of acid that we generate, but just general normal daily living generates about 15,000 units of acid. So at most, what she'd be putting in with this sparkling water, if she drank gallons of it every day, would probably be about 50 units. So the body's making 15,000, you're consuming 15 units. So what do we do with acid? We get rid of it. So our bowels get rid of acid. And sometimes people say your bowels get rid of acid. Yeah, think about the bug that lives in there, acidophilus, acid loving. Your urine should be acid, especially the first morning urine when it's really, really concentrated. And how acid it is a good idea of how the body efficiently eliminates toxins in your sleep. Your sweat should be acid. When you exhale carbon dioxide, and the liver and the kidneys also work together to process out the acid. So we have a bunch of very sophisticated buffering systems. But so here's the answer. That is going to make almost no difference. But here is also a statement from the medical literature. What we eat or drink has very little to do with acid burden, but it has a ton to do with acid buffering. So if you're getting more water because you're drinking sparkling water, it's better to get more water, and you're probably getting ahead of the game that way. And then if you do a Ganoderma coffee or tea, that's going to build all the buffering systems, then it's going to be even better yet. So not a problem.
Perfect. If someone has headaches every day, how many spores per day would you suggest?
Well, we want to figure out what's causing it, right? We want to make sure someone doesn't have an aneurysm or something really, really bad like that. That would be a good thing to know. So every day is definitely not normal. So you could start easy, go to a good structural practitioner, make sure there's not something simple with tension in the upper neck and things like that. But we need to get to the bottom of that. But spores, I like 2 every waking hour when someone has a pain circumstance. But ongoing problems are worth exploring.
Perfect. Kathy has a client who recently had the well-known virus. She still can't taste or smell and is having a hard time breathing. Have you helped any clients with these long-term issues that people are experiencing?
So interestingly enough, no one in my patient base, and keep in mind, I have a very distinct patient base. They're really proactive people, and we put them on really aggressive programs. I have not had anybody with residual challenge that I even know of, which is fascinating. But when people call from a distance, there's things that are very, very good for nerve regeneration. And lipoic acid is good, and carnitine is good. Ganoderma spores are good, and resveratrol is good. All of those things can help the recovery. And if you want fastest, the lipoic acid is 800 milligrams a day in divided doses. The carnitine, 2,000 milligrams in divided doses, over 3 or 4 doses for each of those. Spores are like 2 every waking hour. And the resveratrol is also 100 milligrams every waking hour. And I've seen other cases like severe neuropathy go away fast with that type of dosing.
Perfect. Ralph has a customer who recently developed eczema. Any recommendations on how to deal with the skin condition?
Well, the skin is the largest excretory organ. The body's trying to get rid of something. So we want to facilitate the other detox pathways. A sauna could potentially help. There's things like skin brushing. As strange as it sounds, they could do a coffee enema. They could do a gallbladder flush. There's different types of medical foods that are really, really good for supporting detox, functional foods, medical foods in that category. If it happens to be in Canada, you can get a hold of Diane, and she can help you put together a protocol there. And lots of different ways to deal with that.
Perfect. Cheryl has reacted to the red tea with palpitations. She's very caffeine sensitive. Do you think the cocoa would be a better option?
Try it. The red tea has the lowest caffeine of anything, so I don't think it's caffeine. I hadn't heard that from anybody with red tea, so I'd have to just sit there and process that for a bit. When you look at the heart conduction system, it's stabilized by something called taurine. You make taurine when you methylate effectively. There's so many different things involved in methylating, including the activated B vitamins and magnesium. And there's things that deplete methylation. If the body's overoxidized, it can shunt a pathway down towards something called glutathione. If the body has heavy metals, you actually make metallothionein proteins instead of taurine. I would certainly dose with taurine on a regular basis, magnesium on a regular basis, Ganoderma to increase nitric oxide on a regular basis. And ultimately, that's probably an interesting red flag that something is really out of balance. Because again, there's very little caffeine in the red tea.
Okay, perfect. How about anyone with spondylosis?
Well, usually they ask about spondylolysis or spondylolisthesis. So basically, it's a condition of the bones fusing. And life is motion. We want to keep moving to keep things from fusing completely, and that's something that's slow that happens over time. So, get moving better, move consistently, every joint, every range of motion, pain-free, and start to reverse that process if it's reversible. There's a point where it becomes irreversible. It's usually been going on a long time when it's detectable.
Okay. Karen asked, could someone put the nerve regeneration remedy in the chat? You were trying, I guess you went a little fast.
Yeah, I can do that.
You can? Perfect. So he will do that for you. See? It's very accommodating. All right, well, while we're going on that, Jeffrey says, I have a doctor friend that has cancer of the tongue and lymph node in the throat, same side.
Carol,
He's getting...
I'm a man, which means I can't do...
Oh, sorry. I won't stop. Yep, got it. We will let you type.
I hope I was respectful with that. Kelly, my wife,
that's okay,
will all of a sudden start talking to me, and I'll be in the middle of something, and I'll say, I think you were trying to say something, but I think I heard a noise.
That's okay. Nothing wrong with being human.
Well, you women, you don't know that because your brains are such superior task switchers. There's really not multitasking, but you can task switch at least 300% effectively, more effectively than the average guy. I'm going to say you're above average and I'm a below average task switcher. So you probably got me 10-1. So.
Okay, back to that question for Jeff. I have a doctor friend that has cancer of the tongue and lymph node in the throat on the same side. He's getting the cancer cut out. Is there anything we can help him with from that point?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, cancer of the tongue is getting more common. Sadly, it's from chronic tobacco chewers is one of the really common things. If they can remove it and still leave them able to talk, that's a great thing. Now, the fact that they have a lymph node, now we're talking that it's metastasized. They need to figure out everywhere where it is, whole body PET scan, stuff like that. They'll probably do the surgery on the primary. That's helpful. And then they're probably going to recommend chemotherapy for that lymph node. And then we've got that full YouTube on nutrition and cancer, which is really detailed, or the shorter one, which is the perfect storm. But, I like really comprehensive references for that. So, Carol, did I send you the cancer scientific reference? I don't even know if we had that conversation since, but I decided I was going to learn how to put my my huge detailed presentation on YouTube, and I did it. So,
Excellent. Now we need the link, so you'll have to send it.
so now I'm going to send it to you on Messenger.
Okay. All right. And then I'll give you the next question and I'll go find it.
All right, there it is.
Got it. All right. For someone with PCOS and HPV 16 and depression, how many spores would you suggest or recommend? Or is there another part of the mushroom that you would suggest?
Well, the spores are really, really good. So first we start talking about PCOS. And so the major causes are insulin resistance, obesity, estrogen toxicity. Ganoderma is actually good for all those things, but we want to go on a ketogenic diet as well. And so we actually know that Ganoderma is effective against HPV. That's a PubMed study. If you go right into HPV and Ganoderma lucidum, you'll see plenty of citations. And it also prevents the progression to cervical cancer. So a good lifetime habit of, some form of Ganoderma that she would consistently do every day would be really, really good, like coffee or tea. But we really want a whole lifestyle program where they basically eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right every day. It all adds together. The more you do, the faster you get better, and the greater the healing you can work towards.
Perfect. All right, next question. What would you recommend for back pain? No major injuries, just progressive pain with stiffness and numbness when sitting. It's asked a question of chiropractor, regular massages. What's your suggestions?
Well, I'm a big fan of chiropractors. I am one, and I don't know where you live, but what we find out is that the worst thing for our back is sitting. And so there in physiology, there's something called the SAID principle, SAID, specific adaptation to imposed demand. So if I sit all day long, basically I get good. I don't know if you can see my leg because it's dark, but I get good at shortening my hip flexors. So the psoas is one of the most powerful muscles in the body. It attaches to my thigh, and then it also attaches to the front of my lumbar spine. And so when I shorten it, what happens is if I leave it in that position all day long, the psoas becomes progressively shortened, and it pulls your lumbar spine forward, and it pulls on the discs. And at some point it gets to be a problem. And so there's a yoga stretch, Warrior One, and I don't think you'll be able to see on the camera, but basically you put the leg, no, you won't be able to see on the camera. You put your leg behind you as far as you possibly can, and you have it don't allow it to externally rotate. Internally rotate, tuck your tail hard, squeeze your butt hard, just look up Warrior One, and do that for a couple minutes each day. And then you can also do an exercise where you stand against the wall and you want to flatten your entire spine against the wall. Your heels typically have to be forward about 6 inches. You want your knees locked, and then you learn to tighten the muscles of your low back and flatten it. And your abdominals are a girdle. That you have abdominal muscles that run across and run up and down and weave in and weave out. And we want our abs really, really strong to support our low back. But I'm a big fan of chiropractic. I'm a big fan of yoga. It's all about getting the right practitioner.
Perfect. One of our friends asks, their niece's dog can't walk. What do you recommend?
Probably a good vet. It's interesting that there's a lot of different potential challenges there. There's a lot of big dogs that have knee problems. Dog knee surgery is profoundly expensive. My parents had a dog that needed knee surgery. It was something like $5,000. There's certain breeds that have hip dysplasia. There's other breeds that have long spines that tend to have low back problems. There might be something unique to that breed. Ultimately, we need to figure out what's causing the problem. And now, can you do things like Ganoderma to control the inflammatory process? Sure. Could you do something like glucosamine sulfate, chondroitin sulfate to help the cartilage? Yes. Could you do collagen for connective tissue? You could, but we need to figure out what's causing it first.
Okay. Karen says, I'm thinking the nerve regeneration remedy might help heal the pain of the nerve endings after lung surgery.
That's what they do. Yeah, that's what they do. Could help. Yeah.
Perfect. What do you recommend to use for a customer with sciatic nerve pain?
Well, we want to figure out what's causing it. And sometimes it's a lumbar disc, sometimes it's a pelvis dysfunction, sometimes it's a sacroiliac joint, sometimes it's something called piriformis syndrome, where there's a muscle of the pelvis that can clamp around the sciatic nerve and that can hurt like heck. And there's a certain segment of the population that has that. But again, we have to figure out what's causing the problem. When we have things like that, a really good chiropractor can be really good. These are often things that we make a massive difference in a visit or two. We'll get people up.
Okay, Jeannie has had both knees replaced. Can she still do yoga?
At some point, yeah. So the master I train with in martial arts had a double knee replacement in November, and he's already teaching seminars and kicking and doing movement mobility training. So he's beyond exceptional. I know that's a super fast recovery. The doctors can't even imagine how that's possible. But if the better you go into a circumstance, the better you come out. And he went in really fit, really healthy, really strong. And then he was also very aggressive. So remember that, right? Grit, effort counts to the square. So he probably put in 10 times the effort and he recovered 100 times as fast.
Perfect. Do you have any suggestions for those with chronic fatigue stemming from low mitochondrial function?
Well, here's a quote from the medical literature: all toxins inhibit mitochondria. And so when you're toxic, the mitochondria are impaired. So a good detox is a really good start. But understand that mitochondria have their own unique DNA. And with the right kind of exercise, you can literally double the number of mitochondria per cell and you can triple their energy efficiency. So that means the right type of training can improve your energy by about 600%. So the combination of the right program, the right type of detoxification, the right type of nutrition, the right type of training can lead to basically quantum leaps in energy.
Perfect. Okay, my friends. Okay, here we go. If you could clarify what chiro and osteopath, the difference is between them, please.
Well, in the US, there's light years of difference, and I think it depends on when you graduate. But a number of years ago, the medical colleges just basically bought up the osteopathic colleges. So there's very few osteopaths that actually function like traditional osteopaths, which would be structural manipulation. So 100 years ago, we were very, very close, slight difference in philosophy, but we would work to align the spine with manual or adjusted techniques. When the osteopaths got bought out by basically the drug companies, they became basically the drug model. And I know a new osteopath that does manipulate. In fact, I know two of them, but one of them was one of my students years ago. And he said, Bob, I see that there's a value of medicine, but I also love manual adjusting. What do you think of osteopathy? I said, look, you're obviously going to get the medical training. You already know a lot about structure and balance. You blend the two, you're going to be a great practitioner. And I have a good friend who's a chiropractor. He was a former president of the Texas Chiropractic Board. And he was so frustrated with our license being tweaked or depleted every year. Every change of the legislator, they try to take away more. They take away more. They take away more. And so his daughter said, I want to become a chiropractor. He says, don't you dare. He says, go to school to be an osteopath where they don't whittle away at your license every year, and we'll teach you how to balance people structurally. So she's got a great practice. So it's possible to blend the two. It just takes a real special soul to do it.
Perfect. And the thanks are starting to roll in. So that looks like that is the end for tonight's questions. So please feel to unmute and thank Dr. Bob for his wisdom.
Dr. Bob, we love you. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you, Dr. Bob.
Bob.
Thank you, Dr. Bob. Thanks, Carol.
Thank
Bless
you.
you amazing OGites.
Next week is part 2
Thank
of
you, Carol.
Thank you, Dr. Bob.
Thank you, Dr. Bob.
Thank you, Carol.